Hi there. Today I'm going to paint a koi carp subject, two koi in a pond with some pebbles and lily pads. And it'll probably be quite a long video, and I might need to do it in about 3 separate video clips, which I'll number. We'll see how we go, because I don't want to be rushing this one, and there won't be a lot of commentary. I'll just be saying what I need to say with regards to paint mixing and technique and putting it on. So it'll be quite a quiet video, quieter than my normal ones, alright? The paper is 1/4 imperial size, and it's hot pressed paper, and it's £90. If you're in America, that's 200 GSM. It's 100% cotton rag, and it's by Saunders Waterford. Any type of paper will do. I would always go for 100% cotton rag though. You can use hot pressed paper, cold pressed paper, also called knot, and you can use rough paper. You'll just simply get a different look, okay? So just try and get 100% cotton rag, because it's the best paper, as opposed to wood pulp, okay? So my reference image is a composite of a lot of fish that I've pulled off the internet and my own fish that I painted before. And I've got different elements like lily pads and rocks that I've pulled from different places. I'm not going to be painting the fish or the lily pads or the flower exactly as they appear, so I'm not breaking any copyright there. I'm just using those elements as a guide, a jumping off point. I'll be changing the colours and changing the definition of things as well. So I'm sort of quite happy to use those images and not worry about that. So I've traced this down actually, because I did my drawing on tracing paper to do any rubbings out on the tracing paper rather than be rubbing out on my best paper. And then I've traced it down using my carbon transfer sheet, which a lot of you have probably seen me use before. There's a video about how to make that in my YouTube videos if you want to look. So I stretched the paper the night before on this 9mm thick plywood board. Again, stretching paper is important, because when I start painting now, it'll stay lovely and flat. Okay, so let's get on to now the colours. Right. The colours I've got are these. So if you want to pause the camera, pause the video and write them down, that's great. Try and make sure you've got all of these colours. These are all Winsor Newton professional artist grade tube paint. I recommend them more than the Cadmium range, because the Cadmium range is a student grade and it's not as good quality, obviously. It's good enough, but it's not the best. Then I've got my paints in this palette here. It's a lidded palette. And before I start, I'm just going to make sure that my paints have not got the custard skin forming on them. They're not getting a bit dried up in this warm day, by giving them a gentle squirt with my water spray. And as I progress, I'm going to keep on checking that the paints haven't started to dry out, because you want to avoid that if you can. Because when you want to pick up a dollop of paint, you don't want to have to puncture the custard skin to get through to the moist paint. It sort of undoes the fact that you're using tube paint. You might as well just use pans, which are hard and dry. Okay, so let's get going. So for the pebbles, I'm just going to use a size 3 brush and a size 6 brush, rounds. Okay, I'm going to moisten my brushes in water, give them a good moisten, bang them on the base to get rid of all the air bubbles, then wipe the shafts and they're ready. Then I'm going to re-moisten the tip of the bigger one, and I'm going to make a mix of raw umber, and some burnt sienna. These are 2 nice earth tones, really quite appropriate for painting pebbles and stones, isn't it? And then let's have a little speck, tiny bit of French ultramarine blue, just to reduce the oranginess of that colour there. Right, so I've got sort of pebbly stone colour. So let's start putting in some of these pebble shapes. I'm painting straight onto dry paper at the moment. What I've decided is that the sunlight is coming from this way. So what I'll do as well is I'll have a small 1/4 inch flat brush like that, moisten it, wipe it on a flannel, and then I can just, you know, lift out, if I zoom in on that, lift out a little highlight on the pebble there, where the light might be striking it through the water, okay? And then let's just move on to the next one. I'm not worried too much if the paint now will bleed into this next pebble. The pebbles at the end of the painting will be underneath the fish and obviously in the water, so we don't want too much detail on them. I'm cutting in very carefully around the fish though. Alright, so let's paint this little one. But these smaller ones, I'm just popping them in, and there won't be too much detail on the small ones. Zoom out a bit. And I'm running some of these pebbles together, you know, where they're in a group. I'm just going to use my little brush again to lift out a highlight there. Rinse it each time and wipe it each time, because the hairs will be full of brown paint and then you won't be able to lift the highlight. I'm leaving this one because it will be a grey colour. It's a different part of the bed of the stream, the bottom of the stream is sort of a grey colour rock, so I'm going to leave that until I get onto the grey ones. I'm cutting up into those, the fins a little bit there, because there'd be a gap in the fin, and so the brown pebbles would show through. Right, so I'm running out of paint now, so I better just lift a highlight there, pressing that brush in really hard, you know, wiggling it, and then twisting and wiping away, just to try and get a feeling of curve, you know, on the pebble. And leave it darker here, okay? So let's mix up some more paint, because I've nearly run out. So let's start again. So raw, I'm going to mix a much bigger puddle now, so hopefully I won't run out again. Raw umber, burnt sienna, perhaps that's too much burnt sienna. Bit more water in that, I think. Yeah, little bit of French ultramarine blue. That's about it. It's dilute, but it's got a nice bit of pigment in. The pigment to water ratio is, you know, okay. It's hard to explain this because everyone's slightly different. Everyone mixes differently, but it's not dripping off my brush. It's not that runny. Okay. So let's just carry on. I'm really using the fine tip of this brush to go around the edges of the lily pads. With a nice brush, with a nice point, you can do this. I'm not wiping out the highlight immediately because you need to give it a few seconds for the paint to sink in. Because if you try and lift it out when it's soaking wet, it'll just seep back in. So just wait a few seconds. Watercolour's all about waiting and seeing when things are wet enough or dry enough. You need to care about how wet things are in watercolour. And you only know how long you've got with a bit of experience, really. You know, I've painted so many pictures, I get the feeling of, right, I think that'll be a bit about ready now to lift out. But, you know, you need to practice yourself and get used to it. Okay, so there's my thirsty brush again. This is probably too wet, but I'll just show you. It'll lift out nicely, but it'll probably seep back in a bit too fast, we see. Okay. And as you can see, the pebbles I did earlier, you know, look much paler, don't they, than the ones that I've just done. These are wetter and they always look darker. Watercolour always dries paler. Okay. This is where you need to be quite careful and quite slow. I don't want any brown paint to go on this lovely fish, which is going to be stark white with red blotches on it in places. So I want to keep the fish as clean as I can. I've missed a few pebbles. That's the fin there, so I want to avoid the fin, obviously. Okay, so now we have all the small pebbles in. Let's mix up the colour now for these bigger sort of grey coloured pebbles. So the colour for that is going to be the same colours that you've used already. So that's raw umber, burnt sienna, with that speck of French ultramarine blue in there, a little bit more blue perhaps. And this time as well, we're going to add a bit of Winsor violet. Now be very careful and add Winsor violet in little increments, because it's such a strong colour, it can take over quite fast. So I'm going to mix that all in to the first wash, and we're just neutralising it down, softening it down. A bit more Winsor violet again. I just want a soft purpley bluey grey colour, so perhaps a bit more French ultramarine blue. You know, colour mixing is a very personal thing, different people see colours differently, and again, don't worry if it's not exactly like mine, just do as close as you can, or what looks pleasing to you. Okay, I just don't want them to be very strong dark rocks, because I want them to be soft and quite unobtrusive in the bottom of the stream. Okay. That should be about it, because it will dry a lot paler than that again. And I want to make sure I've got enough, you know, to do all of these rocks. So I'm adding some more water in there. Right, so let's paint these in now. Okay, so as you're filling in colour, try and advance each passage of colour, you know, as a sort of mass. Don't put some colour there and then start over here, you know, because what happens is the edges of every stroke you put start to harden and dry and can look quite, you know, strong and disruptive in the painting. So be as quick as you can, advancing the mass together, filling in, you know, each passage quite quickly, rather than jumping around on the page, you know. You probably will end up with some hard edges, but that's unavoidable, because we're painting wet on dry. If we were painting wet onto wet, you know, if I'd wet all the stone areas first, then we wouldn't have any hard edges appearing at all, because we would be painting into moist paper. But I've chosen to do this wet on dry to give a sort of different look. Actually, it is a sort of, it'll end up giving us a few little backgrounds, which I find might look quite nice on the rocks. So that's why I'm doing it. Also, in a tutorial video, it's always time, because YouTube videos take so long to upload and then so long to view, that you've got to bear that in mind as well. People have only got so much time. I'm really loading my brush up quickly and getting the paint on as quickly as I can, and then sharing it around each passage, each chunk. Again, I'm trying to be as careful as I can around these pale fins. I should actually go to a smaller brush, so I think I will. I'm size 3 brush now to paint around that little delicate area. And same in there, that's very small. Right, so yeah, all of this is part of this same, I'm going to take some of that colour, same flat grey purpley rock. So let's paint it all now. I'm adding some more water to my mix because I'm just about to run out, and I don't want to do that really, because you can never mix the same colour exactly again. It's quite hard. If you are, obviously you're doing this at home, don't be afraid to move your board around so that you've got a better painting angle. I mean, I'm painting sort of quite awkwardly now because I want to keep the board straight on the camera for you. But you don't have to do that, so turn it, to suit your painting hand. Right, last bit of rock, flat rock to do now is this one here. Just zoom in on this bit. Smaller brush. Okay, so let's look at what we've got now. There we are. So at this stage I'm going to stop and let everything dry. We've got some pebbles in the base, down in the sort of lower part of the bed of the stream, and then we've got these flatter purpley rocks which are slightly, coming above it, and we'll unify the whole thing in the next step. Okay, see you in the next clip.